What is the value of a person? Is it the name printed on a prestigious diploma, framed and hung on a wall of polished mahogany? Is it the title etched onto a heavy business card, a single word like director or CEO, that claims to summarize a soul? Or is it something deeper, something hidden in the quiet moments when no one is watching, a flicker of brilliance in the eyes of someone the world has trained itself to look straight through? We are told to build resumes, to collect accolades, to climb ladders built by others. But what if the greatest asset you possess is the one that fits on no resume, the one you carry not in a briefcase, but in your heart? This is a story about that kind of worth. It begins, as so many important things do, in the dead of night, under the cold, silent glow of fluorescent lights, in a place where value is measured in square feet and stock prices, and where a woman named Alara was utterly, completely invisible. To the titans of industry who walked these halls by day, she was a ghost in a gray uniform, a whisper of cleaning spray, the silent reset button that made each day fresh and new for them. She pushed a cart whose squeaky wheel was the only announcement of her presence. Her hands, raw from bleach and work, methodically wiping away the fingerprints of power. She cleaned the gleaming glass walls of corner offices, seeing her own tired reflection superimposed over the glittering city skyline, a world away. Inside these rooms, multi-billion-dollar deals were made, futures were forged, and empires were defended. But for Alara, they were just surfaces to be cleaned. Her life was a ledger of debts, not of assets. Her mother's illness was a relentless, accumulating figure that overshadowed everything, a daily reminder of her own powerlessness. She worked 2 jobs, this one at night in the sterile Cathedral of Finance, Sterling Global, and another by day, serving coffee to people who never learned her name. She moved through the world with her head down, a shield against the casual cruelty of being overlooked. But behind Alara's tired eyes, a secret fire burned. It was a gift, or perhaps a curse, that she never spoke of. Numbers, to her, were not cold, abstract symbols. They were a language. They sang to her, told her stories, revealed patterns and truths that others could not see. When she looked at a spreadsheet, she didn't just see data. She saw the rhythm of a company's heartbeat, the subtle arrhythmia that signaled a hidden sickness. It was a talent she had nurtured in secret, checking out library books on quantitative analysis and market theory, devouring information that had no practical application in her world. It was her one rebellion, a silent act of defiance against the box the world had put her in. Tonight, she was in the penthouse office, the domain of the king himself, Julian Vance. The name was a legend in the city, a man spoken of in tones of awe and fear. They called him the Ice King, a ruthless prodigy who had inherited the global empire from his even more legendary father. The office was an extension of the man's reputation. Stark, minimalist, and immaculate, with a panoramic window that seemed to command the entire city. But tonight, a sign of chaos had breached the sterile perfection. A massive whiteboard, usually pristine, was covered in a chaotic web of figures, flowcharts, and equations. It was the anatomy of a corporate leviathan, a potential acquisition that had the entire market holding its breath. Alara began to clean, her cloth moving in steady circles on the glass desk, but her eyes were drawn to the board. It was a problem that had clearly tormented the CEO. Angry red slashes crossed out entire sections. Question marks hovered like vultures. She could feel the frustration radiating from the ink. And then she saw it. It was small, almost insignificant, a single misplaced decimal in a depreciation calculation deep within the projection model. It was a tiny flaw, a single stitch pulled in a vast tapestry. But Alara, who understood the language of numbers, knew that this one tiny stitch, pulled over 10 years of projected earnings, would unravel the entire thing. Anyone else would have ignored it. It was not her place. It was not her business. Firing was a luxury she could not afford. But looking at the flawed equation was like hearing a beautiful piece of music with a single, jarringly wrong note. It was an offense to the order of things, to the truth she could so clearly see. Her hand trembled as she reached for a dry erase marker left on the ledge. It was a reckless, insane impulse. A janitor correcting the work of a CEO. It was laughable. It was career suicide. But the wrong note was too loud to ignore. With a swift, certain motion, she erased the incorrect figure and wrote the correct one in its place. The equation settled. The music was whole again. She stared at it for a moment, a strange sense of peace washing over her. Then panic crashed down. What had she done? She grabbed her cart, the squeaky wheel suddenly sounding like a siren, and fled the office, her heart hammering against her ribs, leaving behind a single, corrected number in a sea of powerful, important chaos. She was sure her invisible life was about to become very, very visible, and then very, very unemployed. Julian Vance returned to his office long after the sun had risen. His suit immaculate, but his face etched with exhaustion. For 3 weeks, he had been at war with the numbers on that whiteboard. The acquisition of rival firm Omnicorp was meant to be his crowning achievement, the move that would finally pull him out from under his father's colossal shadow. His father had built Sterling Global with instinct and iron will. Julian, a man of data and logic, was determined to build its future on irrefutable proof. But the proof was eluding him. The deal looked perfect on paper, too perfect. His gut, a faculty he had long tried to suppress in favor of analytics, was screaming that something was wrong. But the numbers, dissected by the best minds in his company, insisted it was a golden opportunity. He had spent the night with his legal counsel, David Chun, arguing in circles, David urging caution and Julian growing more frustrated with his own inability to find the flaw. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a rare crack in his icy facade, and stared at the board, preparing for another battle. He scanned the familiar equations, the labyrinth of his own mind laid bare, and then he froze. His eyes narrowed, focusing on one small section of the board. A single number had been changed. It wasn't his handwriting. The ink was a slightly different shade of blue, the stroke of the 7 cleaner, more confident than his own harried scrawl. It was the depreciation forecast for Omnicorp's international shipping fleet, a detail so granular he had barely given it a second thought. But the new number, it changed everything. He walked closer, his mind racing, rerunning the calculations in his head with the new variable. The change was subtle at first, but as he extrapolated it out year over year, the effect compounded, cascading through the entire model like a virus. Projected profits began to shrink. Margins tightened. The debt-to-asset ratio, once robust, became precarious. The golden goose was suddenly revealed to be a Trojan horse, stuffed with hidden liabilities and overvalued assets. The flaw, the single, fatal flaw he had been searching for. It was right there, revealed by a single, anonymous blue number. Who had been in his office? His mind immediately jumped to corporate espionage. Marcus Thorne, the veteran board member who saw him as a reckless boy playing in his father's chair, would love nothing more than to see him fail. Had one of Thorne's minions snuck in? But that made no sense. Why reveal the flaw? Why help him? It was a warning, not sabotage. He buzzed his assistant. Get me the security footage for my office, from midnight to 6 a.m. this morning. Now he paced the length of the vast office, the city lights beginning to dim as dawn broke. His mind a whirlwind of possibilities. The footage arrived on a tablet within minutes. He hit play, his jaw tight. The timestamp read 3:14 a.m. The door to his office opened, and a cleaning cart squeaked in, pushed by a woman in a gray uniform. Her face was mostly obscured by a curtain of dark hair as she worked, her movements efficient and practiced. He watched her wipe down his desk, empty the trash, her presence so unobtrusive she was practically part of the furniture. He almost fast-forwarded, dismissing her, but then she stopped. She stood before the whiteboard perfectly still, for a full 2 minutes. He leaned closer to the screen, watching her. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she tilted her head, as if listening to something he couldn't hear. He saw her hand hesitate, then reach for the marker. He watched as she erased his number and wrote her own. There was no hesitation in the act itself. It was swift, sure, and decisive. Then he saw the panic. She looked around the empty room as if he were standing right there, her eyes wide with fear. She practically ran from the office. He rewound the footage, watching the moment again. And again. It wasn't malice. It wasn't arrogance. It was conviction. The cleaning lady. A ghost in the machine had just saved him from a multi-billion-dollar catastrophe. He looked up her employee file. Alara Jimenez. Hired 6 months ago. No disciplinary actions. No distinguishing features noted. Invisible. Julian Vance, the man who believed only in data, was now faced with a variable he could not compute. He could fire her. That was the logical corporate thing to do. She had breached protocol. But the number she wrote was not just correct. It was profound. It showed an understanding of his business that his own highly paid analysts had missed. He picked up his phone not to call security, but to call David Chen. "David," he said, his voice low and intense. "Cancel my morning. I need to know everything you can find on a woman named Alara Jimenez. And I think I need to have a conversation with our janitor." On the other end of the line, there was a stunned silence. The Ice King was melting, and no one, least of all Julian himself, knew what would happen next. The summons came not as a pink slip, but as a polite, terrifying request from a daytime supervisor Alara had never met. "Mr. Vance's executive assistant would like to see you." Now the words hung in the air of the cramped, windowless break room, thick with the smell of stale coffee and fear. Her colleagues stared, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. For a cleaner to be called to the penthouse during the day was not a request. It was an execution. Alara's blood ran cold. This was it, the consequence of her insane, impulsive act. She thought about her mother, about the stack of bills on her small kitchen table, about the crushing weight that was about to get so much heavier. She smoothed down her worn gray uniform, a useless gesture of dignity, and followed the supervisor through hallways that felt alien in the bright light of day, filled with the purposeful stride of people in tailored suits who didn't even register her presence. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like an ascent to the gallows. When the doors opened, she was met by a woman with a severe haircut and an iPad, who led her into the CEO's office without a word. And there he was, Julian Vance. He wasn't sitting behind his fortress of a desk. He was standing by the panoramic window, looking out over the city, his back to her. He was taller than she'd imagined, his suit fitting him with the kind of perfection that costs more than her car. The infamous whiteboard was clean, wiped of all evidence. "Miss Jimenez," he said, his voice calm and even, without turning around. "Thank you for coming." Alara's throat was dry. She managed a small, terrified nod. He turned, and his eyes met hers. They were a startlingly clear shade of gray, and they weren't angry. They were intensely, unnervingly curious. "Please, have a seat." He gestured to one of the leather chairs that faced his desk, a chair where executives and foreign dignitaries sat, not cleaners. She perched on the edge of it, her hands clenched in her lap. She felt like a fraud, a child playing dress-up in the king's throne room. Julian sat opposite her, not behind his desk, but in the other chair, creating an unexpected sense of intimacy, of equality. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. "Last night," he began, "someone made a change to a financial projection I was working on. On my whiteboard," he paused, letting the statement hang in the air. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. She couldn't breathe. She could only nod again, a tiny, jerky movement. "That someone," he continued, his voice dropping lower, "was you." It wasn't a question. It was a fact. She closed her eyes, bracing for the inevitable. I am so sorry, sir. I don't know what I was thinking. I'll pack my things. It will never happen again." He held up a hand, stopping her. "I'm not going to fire you." Miss Jimenez, her eyes snapped open. Of all the scenarios she had played out in her head, this was not one of them. "I want to know why," he said simply. "Not why you think you're in trouble. I want to know why you changed that specific number." He pointed to the now blank whiteboard. "Walk me through your logic." She stared at him, bewildered. This was a test, a cruel, elaborate game before he fired her. But his expression was deadly serious. She had nothing left to lose. So she began to speak. Her voice, At first a trembling whisper, grew stronger as she stepped into the one world where she felt truly confident. It was the depreciation schedule for the maritime assets, she said, the technical jargon feeling strange in her mouth. The projection was using a standard linear 20-year model, but Omnicorp's fleet, their maintenance records, which are public, show they defer major overhauls. Their ships have a much shorter functional lifespan before they require massive capital reinvestment, closer to 15 years. The model didn't account for that accelerated decay. Your number was mathematically correct for the model, but the model itself was wrong. It was too optimistic. It didn't tell the true story. As she spoke, she watched a change come over Julian Vance's face. The cool curiosity was replaced by a look of intense, focused astonishment. He wasn't just hearing her words. He was understanding them. He had seen the what, but she was explaining the why with a clarity that had eluded his entire team. The true story, he repeated softly, as if tasting the words. And what is the true story, Miss Jimenez? The story, she said, her confidence surging, is that Omnicorp is a dying star. It's burning brightly, but it's consuming itself from the inside out. The acquisition looks like you're buying a starship, but you're really buying a ghost ship, full of hidden costs that will appear in 5 to 7 years and sink you. There was a long silence. Julian leaned back in his chair, his gray eyes searching her face, looking for something he couldn't name. He had read the dry report from David Chan that morning. Elara Jimenez, 28 years old, high school graduate, top of her class, 2 years of community college, dropped out. Reason, family medical crisis, a string of low-wage jobs, a mountain of debt. On paper, she was nobody, but the woman sitting in front of him was not nobody. She was a weapon. I am offering you a position, he said, the words sudden and sharp. A 1-month consulting contract. The pay will be enough to settle your mother's current medical bills. In full, Elara's world tilted on its axis. She must have misheard. What? I want you to analyze the full Omnicorp deal. I'm going to give you every piece of data we have, internal reports, market analysis, everything. I want you to find the other ghost ships. I want you to tell me the true story. He stood up, his towering presence filling the room. My board will think I'm insane. My advisors will try to have me committed. I don't care. For weeks, the most expensive minds in this city have told me this deal is perfect. In one night, with one look, you told me the truth. That is a skill I cannot afford to ignore. Elara was speechless, her mind reeling from the whiplash of moving from imminent termination to an offer that would change her entire life. It was impossible. It was a dream. Why? She whispered. Why me? Julian looked out the window again, at the city spread below him like a blueprint. Because my father built this company on gut feelings, he said, his voice tinged with a note of something she couldn't decipher, perhaps pain. I've spent my entire life trying to replace gut feelings with data, but you seem to have the ability to hear the data's soul. I need that. Sterling Global needs that. So, Miss Jimenez, he said, turning back to face her, a ghost of a smile on his lips for the first time. Do we have a deal? The first day of Elara's new life was a baptism by fire. She traded her gray uniform for the best clothes she owned, a simple black dress and a worn cardigan, which still felt woefully inadequate as she walked through the gleaming halls of the executive floor. Heads turned. Whispers followed her. The story had already spread like wildfire. The janitor, plucked from obscurity by the Ice King himself, was now a consultant. It sounded like a madman's fantasy. She was shown to a small, glass-walled office, not far from Julian's own. A brand-new laptop sat on the desk, and a stack of binders 3 feet high waited for her. This was the raw data of the Omnicorp deal, a mountain of paper that represented billions of dollars and the future of 2 global companies. Her first meeting was with David Chun, Julian's lawyer and confidant. He was a sharp, impeccably dressed man whose polite smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He was the wary ally, the voice of reason trying to make sense of his friend's impulsive decision. Elara, he said, testing her name. Julian has a great deal of faith in your unique perspective. The subtext was clear. I think he's lost his mind, but I'm paid to go along with it. He's asked me to get you up to speed and provide anything you need. David walked her through the corporate structure, the key players, the official narrative of the deal. He was professional, courteous, but there was a wall between them. He was observing her, waiting for her to fail, to prove this was all a mistake so things could go back to normal. Then came Marcus Thorne. He didn't wait for an introduction. The senior board member, a man who had been Julian's father's contemporary, strode into her new office unannounced. He was a bull of a man, with a florid face and eyes that glittered with undisguised contempt. He was the skeptical gatekeeper, and he saw Alara not as a hidden talent, but as an existential threat to his world order. He didn't even look at her, instead addressing David. "Is this the new Oracle?" He sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The girl who reads tea leaves in the balance sheets? What's next, Julian? Are we hiring a psychic to guide our portfolio?" He finally turned his dismissive gaze on Alara. "Let me give you some advice, little girl. This is not a fairy tale. This is a boardroom. You are a janitor. And when this foolish game is over, that's all you'll be. Don't get comfortable." He swept out of the office, leaving a toxic silence in his wake. Alara felt herself shrink, the fragile confidence she had found in Julian's office crumbling into dust. The weight of their disbelief was suffocating. She was an imposter, a fraud. She didn't belong here. Julian had made a terrible mistake. She looked at the mountain of binders, at the incomprehensible jargon, and felt a wave of nausea. She couldn't do this. That evening, as she sat alone in the silent office long after everyone else had gone home, staring at a page of impenetrable financial derivatives, the door opened. It was Julian. He didn't say anything at first, just leaned against the doorframe. His tie loosened, the armor of the CEO slightly askew. "Thorne paid you a visit," he stated. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "He's from an older world," Julian said, walking into the room. "A world where your value is determined by your last name and the school you went to. He's afraid of anything he can't understand. And he can't understand you. Which, to be honest, I find deeply satisfying." He looked at the binders, then at her exhausted face. "Don't read those," he said. The statement was so unexpected she could only stare at him. "Not like they do. My analysts have read them 100 times. They've built models and run regressions. They see the trees. I need you to see the forest. Ignore the noise. Look for the silence. What isn't there? What story are they trying not to tell?" His words were a lifeline. He wasn't asking her to be one of them. He was asking her to be herself. He was giving her permission to use her gift in her own way. A switch flipped inside her. The fear didn't vanish, but it was joined by a surge of determination. Marcus Thorne was wrong. This wasn't a game. It was a puzzle, and she was born to solve puzzles. For the next 2 weeks, Alara lived in that office. She slept on the small couch, fueled by coffee and a fierce, burning need to prove Julian right. She didn't just read the data. She immersed herself in it. She spread pages across the floor, drawing connections with colored markers, creating a vast, intricate map of Omnicorp's financial soul. The numbers began to sing to her again, not a hymn of success, but a discordant, troubled dirge. She found the silences Julian had told her to look for. A subsidiary in Southeast Asia with suspiciously consistent, perfectly rounded revenue numbers, quarter after quarter, defying all market fluctuation. An insurance division that paid out claims at a rate far below the industry average, suggesting they were either incredibly lucky or systematically denying legitimate claims, creating a bubble of false profitability. Julian would visit her late at night, after the office was empty. These became their stolen hours. He would bring her food and they would talk. She would explain her findings, her voice animated, her hands tracing the patterns she saw on the floor. He would listen, not as a CEO but as a student, fascinated by the way her mind worked. In these quiet moments, she began to see the man behind the Ice King persona. She learned of the immense pressure he felt, the constant comparison to his revered, larger-than-life father. He confessed a past failure, A tech startup he had championed that had crashed and burned. A mistake Marcus Thorne never let him forget. "My father built skyscrapers with his bare hands," Julian told her one night, staring out at the city lights. "I feel like all I do is rearrange the furniture inside them." "You're not your father," Elara said softly, her boldness surprising her. "You see things he wouldn't have. You saw me." The look he gave her then was something more than professional curiosity. It was a look of genuine connection, of dawning admiration that went beyond her talent with numbers. A fragile, unspoken bond was forming between them, forged in the late-night silence, a shared secret in the heart of the corporate machine. And as their connection deepened, so did Elara's investigation. She was pulling on a thread, and a vast, rotten tapestry was beginning to unravel. She was getting closer to the heart of the deception, the one great lie upon which the entire Omnicorp valuation was built. But she wasn't the only one digging. Marcus Thorne, infuriated by Julian's continued faith in the janitor, and threatened by the progress she was making, had started his own investigation. But he wasn't investigating Omnicorp. He was investigating Elara, and he was about to find the weapon he needed to destroy her and Julian once and for all. The attack came without warning. Julian was in a tense budget meeting when his assistant interrupted, her face pale. "Mr. Thorne has called an emergency board meeting. Effective immediately. He says it's a matter of corporate malfeasance." The phrase was a dagger aimed at the heart of Julian's leadership. He walked into the boardroom to find the entire board assembled, their faces grim. Marcus Thorne stood at the head of the table, a smug, predatory look in his eyes. David Chun stood by the window, his expression unreadable but tense. In the center of the polished table was a single, thin file folder. "Gentlemen," Thorne began, his voice booming with false gravitas, "I have called you here today because I have discovered a grave threat to the integrity of Sterling Global. A threat brought into our very inner sanctum by Mr. Vance himself." He let the accusation hang in the air. "For weeks, our CEO has based a critical, multi-billion-dollar strategic decision on the advice of an unqualified, unknown individual. A janitor." He spat the word out like it was poison. "I was concerned. I felt it was my duty, my fiduciary responsibility, to find out who this prodigy really is." He opened the folder. "Her name is Elara Jimenez, and she is not a misunderstood genius. She is a desperate, fraudulent grifter." He pulled out a document. "This is a copy of a settlement from her previous employer, a small accounting firm. She was accused of embezzling funds. The case was settled out of court, but the implication is clear." He then produced another set of papers. "And these," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "are the records of her family's crushing medical debt. A woman buried in bills with a history of financial misconduct, suddenly given access to the most sensitive data in our company. It's a textbook case. She saw a young, impressionable CEO, still haunted by his past failures, and she played him like a fiddle." Thorne looked directly at Julian, his eyes alight with triumph. "He has been compromised. His judgment is catastrophically flawed. He has put this entire company at risk, not for a sound business reason, but because he has been conned by a pretty face and a sob story. I move for a vote of no confidence in Julian Vance as CEO, and for the immediate termination of his consultant." The room was silent, the air thick with tension. The board members, conservative and risk-averse, looked from Thorne's damning evidence to Julian's stony face. David Chun stepped forward. "Marcus, this is the truth, David." Thorne roared. "Something our CEO seems to have forgotten." Just as Julian was about to speak, to defend Elara, to defend himself, the boardroom doors opened. Elara stood there. She wasn't wearing her simple dress. She had gone home and changed into a crisp white blouse and black trousers, her own form of battle armor. Her face was calm, her eyes clear and steady. She held a single memory stick in her hand. "I believe you're talking about me," she said, her voice quiet but carrying across the silent room. Thorne sneered. "The little interloper herself. Security. Remove this woman." "She's not going anywhere," Julian said, his voice like ice. He looked at Alara, a question in his eyes. She gave him the slightest of nods. She was ready. "Mr. Thorne," Alara said, walking calmly to the head of the table. "You are right about two things. I am in debt, and I was accused of embezzlement." A murmur went through the room. "What you failed to discover in your thorough investigation," she continued, her gaze locking with his, "is that I was cleared. The money was found. It had been stolen by the partner's son. The settlement was to buy my silence, to avoid a scandal. I refused it." She looked around at the stunned faces of the board members. "You see, my integrity is not for sale." Unlike Omnicorp's, she held up the memory stick. "For the past 2 weeks, I haven't been looking at Omnicorp's assets. I've been looking at their soul. And I found a cancer." She plugged the drive into the room's projector. The screen lit up, not with spreadsheets, but with a complex web of interconnected shell corporations, offshore accounts, and transaction logs. "This," she said, her voice ringing with authority, "is the real Omnicorp, not a shipping and logistics firm. It's a money laundering scheme, a massive systemic fraud." She walked the board through it, her explanation clear, concise, and irrefutable. She showed how the subsidiary in Asia was a phantom, existing only to inflate revenue. She showed how the insurance division was a slush fund. She unraveled a decade of deception with cold, hard data. The ghost ships she had been looking for were not literal. They were an entire fleet of phantom assets and cooked books. The acquisition wouldn't have just been a mistake, she concluded, her eyes blazing. It would have made Sterling Global complicit. It would have destroyed this company from the inside out when the fraud inevitably collapsed, and then she delivered the final, killing blow. She projected a series of transaction records on the screen, linking one of the primary shell corporations to a private investment fund. "This fund," she said, her voice dropping, "received a significant consulting fee from Omnicorp just last month. It's a fund where one of you in this room is a silent partner." She looked directly at Marcus Thorne, whose face had gone from florid red to a pasty, sickly white. "Isn't that right, Mr. Thorne? You weren't trying to stop this deal to protect the company. You were trying to stop it because my investigation was getting too close to exposing you. You knew about the fraud, and you were going to be paid handsomely for your silence after the merger went through and the evidence was buried forever." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Thorne's ragged breathing. He had been so focused on discrediting the janitor that he never imagined she could uncover his own deep-seated corruption. He had underestimated her. They all had. Julian Vance stood up, his face a mask of cold fury, but his eyes, when they looked at Alara, were filled with a profound, overwhelming respect. He had bet his entire career on her, and she had not only saved his company, she had exposed the rot within its own walls. The game was over. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Marcus Thorne was escorted from the building by security, his career and reputation incinerated in the space of 10 minutes. The board, shaken and humbled, gave Julian a unanimous vote of confidence, their skepticism replaced by a newfound, if grudging, respect for his unconventional methods. The Omnicorp deal was scuttled, and the information Alara had uncovered was quietly turned over to the proper authorities, setting off a chain reaction that would rock the financial world. But in the quiet hours after the storm, in the vast penthouse office, none of that mattered. Alara stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker to life, the same view she had once seen through her own ghostly reflection. She had faced down the dragon and won. She felt a sense of dizzying disbelief, a quiet, powerful vindication. Julian came to stand beside her. The usual distance between them, the invisible line between CEO and consultant, had vanished. "They're drawing up your contract," he said softly. "The one you were offered. The one that clears your mother's bills," she nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "Thank you." "No," he said, turning to face her fully. "Thank you." He reached out, his hand gently touching her arm, and a jolt, warm and electric, passed between them. "That's not the only contract they're drawing up." He paused, his gray eyes searching hers. "I'm creating a new position, head of strategic analysis. It requires someone who can see what no one else can. Someone who can tell the true story behind the numbers. It reports directly to me. He didn't need to say her name. The offer hung in the air between them, more life-altering than the first. This wasn't a temporary contract. This was a future. This was a place at the table. This was him telling her, in front of the entire world, that she belonged. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of shock and gratitude and overwhelming relief. I don't know what to say. Say yes, he whispered, his voice laced with an emotion she had never heard from him before. It wasn't the command of a CEO. It was the plea of a man who had found something precious and was terrified of losing it. Alara, you didn't just save the company. You reminded me what it's supposed to be about. It's not about legacy or profits or outdoing my father. It's about finding true value. And you, he hesitated, taking a small step closer. You are the most valuable thing I have ever found in that moment. The last of the Ice King melted away, revealing the man beneath. Someone who had been just as lost and invisible in his own way as she had been in hers. He had been trapped in a prison of expectation, and she, with her quiet integrity and brilliant mind, had just handed him the key. She looked up at him, at this powerful, perceptive man who had seen her when no one else had, and she smiled, a real, radiant smile that lit up her entire face. Yes, she said, her voice clear and strong. Yes, it was more than an acceptance of a job. It was an acceptance of a new life, a new beginning, and the unspoken promise of a story that was just getting started. A story not of a CEO and a janitor, but of two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of places and, in doing so, had found themselves. So I ask you again, what is a person's true worth? It isn't found in the pristine halls of power or on the crisp pages of a resume. It isn't defined by the job you have, the clothes you wear, or the balance in your bank account. True worth is the fire inside you. It's the hidden talent you nurture in secret, the integrity you hold on to when no one is watching, the courage to speak a truth that no one else can see. Alara's gift wasn't just with numbers. It was her refusal to be defined by her circumstances. Julian's power wasn't just his title. It was his ability to look past the surface and recognize that brilliance can be found in the most unexpected places. The world is full of people wearing uniforms of invisibility, their true value overlooked and underestimated. Perhaps you are one of them. Perhaps you know one of them. Remember this story. Your worth is not determined by those who look through you, but by the unique, unrepeatable, and powerful story that only you can write. What is your hidden talent? What is the secret fire you carry? Share your story in the comments below, and let's remind the world that the most valuable assets we have are the ones that can never be quantified on a balance sheet. Your story matters. You matter. Now go and show them what you're truly worth.